Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis. This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A sideline fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Porter says, cheated!
You wanna win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome to another episode of Nos Odietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our subscribers. We're recording on February 27th, 2024, and I am your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today is my co-host, Aaron Campo, and our engineer, Lickett. Well, the Sounders opened their 2024 campaign with a 2-1 loss on the road to LAFC. It wasn't exactly the dream start we wanted, but there was definitely some mitigating factors. The biggest of these was a slew of injuries up and down the spine of the roster. Heading into the week, João Paulo, Steph Fry, and Yeimar were all questionable, and their lack of inclusion was basically expected. Then Albert Rusnak picked up an ankle injury during the final training session, forcing the Sounders to rethink their entire tactical approach without any training sessions to try it out. They ended up going with a 4-4-2 with Raul Rui Diaz effectively asked to drop in and do some of the number 10 stuff. I wouldn't say it went particularly poorly, but it definitely wasn't great. The most obvious issue was how disconnected Jordan Morris was from the midfield. There was also some issues with the Sounders' inability to control the game like they normally do, mainly due to the press that wasn't as effective as it often is, and a midfield that didn't quite have the same bite. Aaron, what did you make of this game?
I think you largely summed it up. I did not expect a lot from this game, even though I'm still pretty optimistic about this team. I'm very optimistic about this team, in fact. But seeing the injuries, especially once Albert went down, I said, this is probably not going to be a point in this game. And that's okay. I mean, LAFC is a game you can afford to lose. LAFC away is a game you can afford to lose, especially in whatever month it is, February. And when the Sounders went down 2-0, I said, well, this sucks because I'm going to have to try to convince myself and potentially other people, I guess, that this isn't, we're probably going to lose this game by 3 goals, but it wasn't that bad and nobody should really be concerned. And so the fact that the Sounders actually fought back, I think, quite effectively, made some pretty significant adjustments and made it, interesting down the stretch, I think was really a testament to the ability of the team to make those adjustments, and the team to have the right mentality in that situation, down 2-0 against a team that's sort of considered to be your rival for the top spot in the conference, against the team that has, a really good defense that is going to be tough to come back against, and then to correct a lot of the mistakes and fix the things that weren't working and really make a game. And I think was really encouraged. So obviously a loss is never something you're happy about, but I think that this went about as well as any loss could go. And I'm actually higher, I think, on this team than I was going into this game, as weird as that sounds.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it was, it could, I guess as losses go, you could be better in that you feel like you actually deserved to win. I don't think the Sounders felt like they deserved to win this one, but they did enough that, they started well. I think that they responded well to the second goal. They responded really well to the second goal. And a lot of that was Pedro de la Vega coming into the game. And I thought it was really hit. And that's probably the aspect of this that gives me the most hope is that, as soon as they put in a difference maker into the roster and they had a little bit more of a a formation that they were familiar with, they were able to play much more effectively. But even before that, they were never pinned back. They were never struggling to connect passes. They were not, they were never really under it, I didn't think. And so I thought they were hanging in there, 1-0 down at halftime. I think they would have considered 0-0 to be a fair, a fair result at that point. But, I was actually trying this new note-taking method during the game, and I actually had a lot more action in the Sounders attack than in LAFC's attack. I don't know if that's exactly how it worked out in terms of the shot totals, but I thought the Sounders were getting good looks by and large. And, like Rui Diaz ended up with 5 shots, which is, a pretty good total. He didn't do enough with those 5 shots, I don't think, but he was getting himself into dangerous positions. There was a chance early on where Morris got played in, sort of a deflected Christian Roldan cross, and he hits it well, but he hits it, well within the range of Hugo Lloris's his sphere of coverage. And so, it was probably never going to be a goal, but, I thought it was a good start. And then Roldan found Morris again on that breakaway. And I think it's fair to say, okay, Morris probably needs to do a little bit more with that, but he did draw a foul. He drew a penalty. Pedro de la Vega converts it. And then I thought from that point forward, it was really all Sounders. The Sounders looked much more likely to get the equalizer than LAFC was to add a third goal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that anytime you find yourself in a situation like that where you're down by 2 goals and you get one back and you force the team, the home team, to say, we are setting up shot and we are just going to hang on to what we have.
Right.
That's a positive thing. Maybe you don't feel great about it because you don't get the second goal, but I think that they clearly turned the tide. De La Vega, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but absolutely changed the game.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that was, I think, the most encouraging for me. And, we've seen the Sounders we've seen very good Sounders teams have real stinkers against LAFC.
Yes.
And
they've never won a regular season there. And this was definitely not their worst performance in LA. That's for sure. Definitely
not. So, it's frustrating, but in a way that I think is much better than it could have gone. And I'm excited to see this team at full strength. Now, the obvious flip side to all of this optimism is, I think one of the concerns everybody had about this team was they're on the older side, especially in key positions.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that can happen with teams that have, a higher average age in those positions. And so how do they deal with that? Is there ever going to be a time when the team is fully healthy? Probably not. But my counter to that would be, we've seen the Sounders playing down 3 or 4 key players before, and they're usually not able to hang with the best teams in the league away from home when they're down 4 or 5 players.
Exactly.
And I think that's the real takeaway from this game is the Sounders went into a situation that was gonna be an uphill battle, and not only did they not get embarrassed, I think it was a fairly even match generally.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stats say it was even. Even by non-penalty XG, it wasn't too. I want to say that there was a advantage for LAFC, but it wasn't a big one. The 2 goals they scored were pretty low probability chances, frankly. The second one was pretty ridiculous. And I think you can argue the Sounders could have done better defensively on both of those. On the first one, Obed Vargas doesn't quite close down Omar Santos as hard as you would like. But he's not just letting him go free, and he hits he fits a nice floated cross. And really the problem there is you could see, what's frustrating about that one is you could see Jackson Reagan motioning to the danger area. He's basically pointing to where this cross is going to go the whole time as the play is developing. And unfortunately, Nuhu decides that his best move is to stick to the post, and then still gets beat on the post. So it's a very frustrating thing to watch the replay of, especially. I think that's a pretty preventable goal. And then the second one, I think you could maybe argue that Atencio maybe again could have closed down Bogusz a little harder on the shot, but that's not. I mean, he's like fading away, and it's from a weird angle, and he hits it basically off the underside of the crossbar. I mean, it's a tough one to really second guess too badly. More than those plays, I just think it was. I don't think Atencio and Vargas played badly, but I think this did show that they aren't exactly an ideal pairing, and there is some concern. I think there's some room for concern that if João Paulo is out for an extended period, they still don't have an ideal setup. Now, this was obviously accentuated by also missing Albert Rusnak, and so they didn't have a 10. So they were, in addition to only missing their best defensive midfielder, they also were down a number in the midfield. And so I think that had some compounding effects. And I think that's, I think even this week where, Brian Schmetzer went on the radio today and said that he's expecting Pedro de la Vega to start. Like, even if the Sounders start in a 4-2-3-1 with de la Vega in the middle, I think we'll have a much better idea of what this team is going to look like.
Yeah, I absolutely. And I think, just to very briefly get back to the midfield pairing in the LAFC game, I think that what you saw there is two guys who are very good all-rounders who can complement either a more attacking midfielder or a more creative midfielder or a more defensive midfielder, but can't like be the opposite number necessarily.
Sure, yeah.
I don't think it was necessarily. I think there was a lot of focus on the midfield didn't look as tight defensively. For me, it just felt like they weren't able to control the midfield, and not just in the defensive phase, but also in the attacking phase.
Yeah,
like they weren't.
Yes,
they weren't quite as comfortable in possession. They weren't making as many line breaking passes. I feel like there were some attacking runs that weren't getting picked up, stuff like that. And, I think they both played fine, but the Sounders really need good performances from their central midfield based on the way they play to be successful. And I thought that the back line, aside from Nuhu in that one instance, I thought generally he had an okay game defensively, but that was a very frustrating one because it's not the first time we've seen a goal like that.
Right.
But I thought they coped pretty well, despite, I think, having a little more pressure than maybe they would necessarily have behind that midfield.
Right. Yeah. And I think where you see the deficiency is they're asking Raul Ruidiaz to drop back and to do some number 10 type stuff. And he did drop back into the midfield a little bit to help with possession, but he certainly wasn't hitting line breaking passes. He certainly wasn't, he wasn't doing that stuff. Like I don't know that him and Morris connected a single pass together. And, I don't know the last time the Sounders used a 4-4-2 front to start a game. Like they've chased games before where they had two forwards on the field like that. But they didn't do it at all in training all preseason. So this was a new formation. I don't, like you might have to go all the way back to like the Oba Deuce days to find where they were running something like a 4-4-2. And even then you kind of had two playmaking forwards. So it's like they were able to, their whole thing was interchanging. So I don't know. I mean, I don't even know what you would compare this to in terms of like Sounders past. So it was a gamble, but I don't think that the formation was what cost them ultimately. I mean, they still generated chances. They still, didn't give up a ton of chances. It was just one of those things where they didn't, and this is the part that I think stings a little bit, is that it does feel a lot like so many of the losses last year where it's okay, they didn't play badly, but still you'd like, you can still find things that you want them to do better. And it's one game. I guess that's what it comes down to. But I can understand why people are frustrated, and I think it's a little early to be, losing your mind over "I told you so." And I don't quite know what the "I told you so's" are sort of right now a little all over the place. Like I said, like I don't think anyone said don't expect Albert Rusnak to stay healthy. This is maybe the healthiest player the Sounders had. He gets a freak ankle injury. What are you going to do?
Right. Yeah.
And his backup is supposed to be Pedro de la Vega, who's not quite fit yet.
Right. Yeah. I think that if De La Vega can start this game, I mean, who knows, right? But based on what we saw from him in the limited amount of time he had, I feel a little better about the way it goes instead of Raul having to play that sort of tweener 10-9
Right.
role. I thought Raul's game was interesting because I don't think that he was impactful on the game necessarily.
Fair.
Like,
Yeah.
But I thought he looked good, obviously, until he got hurt. And so who knows how that changes things. But like physically, he looked like he had the first step that was missing a lot of last year. He looked just a little more, I don't know, in control of the ball. His touch seemed better.
Yeah.
Like he looked a lot like him, the version of him that we were all kind of hoping to see again.
He definitely didn't disappear, which I think is what would happen a lot last year, is he would sort of just disappear.
Yeah, he was making good off the ball runs. His hold up play I thought was pretty effective. It's just that there wasn't anybody that could break lines to lay it off to, and he wasn't capable of breaking the lines. Like, it was just a weird role for him to be playing. But I found myself saying, like, that does look like I'm used to Raul looking, and how he didn't look last year. So hopefully this injury isn't, a long-term thing, and he can show more of that, because if he can play that well and at that level in a position that's a little more well suited to his game, where he's not, asked to do as much hold up stuff and not asked to be a creator, I think it could be interesting to see what he can bring. Because at this point, Raul is sort of a bonus. Like, anything he brings to the table,
right,
is great. If he can, perform at 80% of peak Raul, that's a pretty big bonus.
Yeah, I would agree. I would totally agree with that. It's going to be interesting to see how that evolves over time. What did you all that said, and I guess at some point we will talk about Pedro de la Vega, but did you, I feel like I needed to get your thoughts on just the decision to go with the 4-4-2 instead of doing something that was maybe a little bit more, it would have been easier, I think, in some ways, if I guess maybe the obvious, for lack of a better term, would be to start Raul on at center mid, move Morris to the right, and move Roldan to the middle. And at least that way you're playing in a familiar formation. But I don't know that really solves any of the issues, because it's not like Morris is really going to help you with possession on the right wing anyway. Yeah,
and I wouldn't be shocked. This is just conjecture, but I wouldn't be shocked if there is some concern with asking Raul to do all of the forward work. I think that maybe that's potentially something they've identified as something that they need to not have him doing if he's going to contribute at a high level. So that could potentially be part of it.
I don't think he's not at his best when he's mucking it up with center backs, I guess, is your point.
Yes, absolutely. And I think now more than ever that is true. It's never been a strength, but I think it's something he was so good in every other phase of the game that it wasn't as big of a deal previously.
Yeah.
Now I think, especially at this phase in the season, maybe that's not something you want to do. And, I think that there is an argument to be made for going with a more familiar formation. And I'm not going to tell anybody that they're wrong for thinking that, but it's going to be extremely hard to convince me that was the difference.
Right. Yeah. And I think I'm sympathetic to this idea too, is that, the Sounders spent all off season, all preseason training with Morris as a forward, with Roldan as a right mid, and sort of a tacit promise that this was the role they were going to play this year. Not necessarily just because, they deserve that, but because the Sounders believe that's their best position. And to just throw that out on the first game at the first sign of, trouble, where it's like, we're not even going to try to pretend like we have alternate plan. Like, as soon as we need you to move, we're going to move you, kind of thing. Like, maybe if this was game 5 or 6, it would have been a little easier sell to say, look, we just need you to move positions today, rather than, we don't even know when the fix is coming. Like, and so I don't know. I think I'm sympathetic to that. So let's get to the fun part of this discussion. We've waited long enough to talk about Pedro de la Vega. He came in around the 60th minute, and just immediately he brought energy. He brought danger. He was dribbling at opponents. He was asking all kinds of questions with different types of passes. And the thing that I found most pleasing and most encouraging in the whole thing is, yes, okay, he scored a penalty, big deal, but it was everything around the penalty that I found really, really encouraging. As soon as the review started, De La Vega basically went to the spot and was ready to take the penalty. And there was like no question in his mind. I don't know if this was something that got worked out beforehand. No one questioned him. It was his shot to take. He steps up, he takes it confidently, puts it, picks a side, puts it past Hugo Lloris, who, let's call it what it is. This is a guy who won a World Cup not that long ago. He's definitely not the Hugo Lloris that won the World Cup, but he's not that far removed from it. I'm sure it's a somewhat intimidating goalkeeper to be facing down. And then immediately, the ball bounces out, he grabs it, and he barely celebrates. He just takes it and runs it back to the center circle. This is his first career MLS goal, first goal for the Sounders. He doesn't get lost in the moment at all. He's just ready to play, and he just gets out there and he's doing the work again. I loved everything about it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Taylor Twellman's sort of journey through the penalty was extremely funny because, immediately as soon as it becomes pretty obvious that it's going to be called a penalty, he's saying, if I'm Jordan Morris, I'm going, this is my goal. This is my, I'm going right to the spot. And then De La Vega makes it pretty clear that this is going to be his. And as soon as the goal is scored, Taylor's saying a lot of the same stuff you're saying, right? Of just like, I love that attitude. And it was a funny moment. That's not a criticism of Taylor, by the way. This is a pro Taylor podcast, but it was a very funny, emotional journey. And I loved it as well. I think his attitude in coming on, like, I didn't think that the Sounders didn't have like the drooping heads,
right,
bad body language stuff going on necessarily, but there was definitely like a spark when he came on. It's clear that there are still some things to be worked out communication wise, and that they're still getting to know each other. But there were several moments where the timing was just off, and I think in a month or two, the timing is not going to be just off. Like you could see it, right? You could see the ideas in his head and in his teammates' head. Like they seem pretty capable of picking up on his runs, and it seems like they know what he wants to do and they know how to get them the ball. The timing just isn't quite there. So that was exciting to see. And yeah, I mean, the Sounders were pressing up into the end against an LA team who, sometimes you have that flurry of late activity that's really kind of nothing, where it's just a team is confident to retreat into a shell.
Right.
And yeah, there's activity, but it's not really dangerous. But it didn't feel that way at all. Like it felt like the Sounders were genuinely creating pretty decent chances against a bunkered in team. And I'm extremely excited to see what he can do, with 90 minutes, with more familiarity and a higher level of comfort with his teammates. And I think I said this on the last episode for people that were actually able to hear me talking, that
the audio came out good.
No, it did. It always does because look, it's a pro. But yeah, like, I think it's important to be patient, especially with younger players who are coming into the league for the first time. But he did not look like a player that's going to take a long time to adjust.
No.
Very small sample. So I think everything about the patience still applies. But a lot of the concerns that he was going to maybe be mid-season before he was at a level where he was really hitting it in full stride, I don't really have those anymore.
I thought of it a lot like Nico's debut in 2016, where he was just immediately taking guys on, just doing Nico stuff, and it was very clear that he was not going to have a bedding in process. He was going to hit the ground running, and that's what we saw from him. I thought today Brian talked about how we still want to talk, we still need to work with him a little bit on how we defend. But the defensive effort was there. And that's, I think, pretty key. This is a guy, I mean, he was in I think he was in 7 duels or something like that. He was like 4 for 7 on duels. he had, I think he had 4 successful dribbles. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. But this is like, you don't see that. This is not something the Sounders have had on their team very much. And it was just very exciting to see. And I think it's probably the thing that gives me the most hope, aside, along with that, they didn't literally fall apart once they were missing some guys. So, that's all good. One other thing I did want to talk to you about was the replacement refs. I guess we'll call them scabs on the show. Should we call them scabs on the show? We can probably call them scabs on the show. Yeah. So the scab refs, like I did think it was very the journey of people, at least from what I could tell on Twitter, seemed to be like, oh, the guy in the Miami game wasn't too bad, and yeah, he doesn't have any MLS experience, but he has like 20 odd games in the middle of the USL Championship, and then realizing like, wait a minute, this is the best guy they have, and the rest of the players, the rest of the referees that are calling these games are like basically pulled off the street. Yes, they have experience at some level, but a lot of these, I don't think the guy that called the Sounders game, I don't think he had reffed a single match between professionals. Like, yeah, not great. The level is not, and you can see there was all kinds of, like, I'll use the most obvious situation I thought was the penalty where they don't call it in live action. Fine, that happens all the time. That's what VAR is for. VAR calls him over, and he sits there. He watches the same exact replay like 24 or 25 times, and just keeps watching the same replay over and over and over again. And I'm like, at one point, as soon as I saw the replay, I'm like, oh, that's a penalty. They need to review. That's got to be reviewed. They review it. Okay, that'll bang bang. If I'm the replacement ref and I'm having a VAR tell me you need to reverse this, who am I to say no, right? Like, I don't have any ego in this thing. I'm just like trying to get through this thing. And he sits there, watches it forever, ends up taking like literally 4 minutes of the review. Actually itself took 4 minutes.
Yeah. Went back, left. Yeah. This is the point at which I lost my mind.
I think he was making sure it would need to be a yellow. I hope that's what it was.
But he'd watched it like 40 times.
I know.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you said something last week, I think, or maybe this was offline, I don't remember, but basically that I think, MLS is hoping that they can get a good enough performance in week 1 that they have a little bit of additional leverage.
Yeah.
I don't think that happened. If that was actually their goal, I don't think that happened. It was just a really piss poor performance. I frankly do think that it actually favored LAFC. I don't think it was anything like the difference, but I do think that this was an example of a referee very clearly favoring the home team.
Well, I think also to me, this is what it felt like was he was pretty good about calling fouls in the first, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes. But at that point it was 7-8 to 1 in favor of LAFC had committed 7 or 8 fouls. The Sounders had only been called, maybe at that point they might not even called for any. And then he calls the dissent. The thing that just absolutely killed me was Tim Tillman comes in, absolutely cleans out Obed Vargas. It's probably Tillman's 3rd foul of the game. Christian Roldan has his hands up, yelling at him, "That's got to be a yellow. That's got to be a yellow." And then he shows a yellow to Roldan, and Roldan says, "Oh, you're gonna give me a yellow? I'm the and he points to his armband, like, I'm the captain. I'm allowed to talk to you here." And the guy's just like, "Get out of here." And that was at that point there was 9-1 fouls in favor of, or LAFC had committed 9 fouls. The Sounders have been called for 1. And it was I feel like at that point he started letting a lot of like pushes in the back just go. And I don't know if that was an unconscious like desire to like try to. It's like, oh, the foul count is getting too disproportionate. And it's like, well, that's LAFC's game to some degree. This is sort of how they want to play. And I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, well, if he calls the foul on Leo Chu at the top of the box on Leo Chu, maybe LAFC doesn't score that first goal. Like, the goal happened quite a bit after that. And frankly, it happened after Jackson Reagan just put a ball out of bounds for no reason.
Yeah.
But it was a frustrating game to watch. There was another one where there was a corner kick and Illy Sanchez heads it off the crossbar. It hits the crossbar and then it's going to the end line. It doesn't look like it actually crosses the end line. Bawanga takes possession of it, and then they call for another corner kick.
Yep.
And it's like, how is that another corner kick? And I just watched this replay, and like the Twelman and Jake Ziven are just sort of beside themselves as to what are they calling here exactly? Like, how is there another corner? Like, did they think
I really appreciated their commentary on the refereeing in the game. I understand that they cannot. It is not their place or particularly smart of them to talk about it in relation to the lockout.
Yeah.
But I think that they made their feelings pretty clear about the quality of the refereeing. And I appreciated that. There was another one where it was kind of similar to the one where they gave the corner after the Ile header, where Nuhu very clearly shepherds the ball out without touching it, and LAFC gets a corner.
Yeah, that was one where they also could have called a foul on that play.
Yes.
Like Nuhu's getting dragged down as well on that play, and they call it a corner. Yes. Yeah, I remember that. That was around the time when I felt like there was all of a sudden there started to be a lot of no calls where it's like, what's going on here? And I will say I don't think the most egregious call was probably which wasn't in the Sounders game of the weekend, was Sergio Busquets completely pantomimes a foul where Marky, I think it was Marky Delgado, I think that's who it was, goes in for a tackle, doesn't touch Busquets, and gets a yellow card. And then I thought the best part of that was that after the game, Leo Messi goes up to the referee and is complaining to him about like how bad of a job he did, I guess. And it's like, I somehow think you should be very happy that you got away with one here. But I don't know. I can't imagine that Garber or anyone else was really thrilled with the performance of the replacement referees, but it was very well within what I would have expected. I mean, it may have been actually a little better than I would have expected. I know there's a lot of people out there that have talked themselves into believing that, well, how much worse can these guys be? And we got to get rid of Pro. I hate to break it to you, but the whole reason Pro exists is to improve Pro is the replacement.
Right. I saw a lot of it in real time of people saying, well, it's not like these guys are any worse than the regular MLS refs. And I just, no offense, but you could not be more wrong. Everybody hates the refs, no matter what sport, what league, what level they are.
Every league has the worst refs in the world.
It's true. And I watch, I mean, I think everybody knows, I watch a lot of soccer worldwide. MLS refs actually pretty good, miles better than they were pre-pro. It's just not even a comparison. These guys were worse than MLS refs when I started watching MLS regularly in 2009.
Right.
I mean, they're like college level, high school level.
Right. Literally.
Yeah. And the game's a little faster, at this level.
I guess none of these guys apparently had to pass fitness tests because, of course, how can you expect, and that's, I don't want to, I guess on some level it's fair to beat up on the scab refs because they are scabs, but I don't want to put the focus on them. I want to put the focus on, I guess I did happen to talk to the president of PSRA, and so maybe that's I'm biased by having that information, but I guess what they're asking for amounts to essentially $100,000 per team in terms of added pay and bonuses and travel accommodations and various things like that. Man, $100,000 per team, like, put in context, that's like the lowest paid player on your team once you factor in bonuses and everything like that. This is such a small amount of money that we're really arguing over that I don't understand why MLS is, I don't quite understand the play here. Like, Garber made a comment about how, like, maybe it was purposeful that the union rejected the bid, the the contract offer by 95.8%. Well, yes, probably.
Right.
What's the nefarious, yeah, they want a better contract. What?
Yeah. It's insane to me, the levels which the people in charge of the money will go to make people looking out for their best interests the same way you're doing sound like some plot.
Right.
It's just and it's the same. It's not a lot of money at all. It's a ridiculously small amount of money to a league
like a couple
whose
$1 million
ownership is worth like into the trillions probably when you add up the wealth of all the owners.
Yeah.
But it's the same mentality that like has Tesla going to court to get out of $100,000 worth of like fines for toxic sludge in their tunnels, and it's just what you do when you have a business.
Right. It's like well, yeah, you got to fight for every dime.
Right.
Okay.
It's not. It's just what you do, and it's just like, all right, well, everybody's gonna hate you for it,
right?
You know? But I'm sure they're used to that. So
yeah, and this is of course coming at the same time where MLS is just absolutely covering itself in glory with the whole mess over the U.S. Open Cup, which the thing that kills me about the U.S. Open Cup thing is the solution that they proposed, which was to send MLS Next Pro teams instead of MLS teams, wasn't even going to save money. I mean, they were still prepared to send all these players to various places around the country. So I don't quite understand what they're even fighting over. I mean, essentially what MLS could do if they wanted to is just work with the players union to change the CBA to allow for more free passage of players from the first team to the second team, and that would have been the solution. But what seems to be happening is they just don't want to have to negotiate with the players union over this. It's just a very silly, I don't know, there's just a lot of own goals going on with MLS right now, and I don't quite, it just seems like this is a time where MLS should be consolidating its wins and not looking for losses. And yet they seem to be picking all these fights. Man, pick these fights in a few years when you're not riding when you've already sort of like brought this messy momentum to a head, right? You're still like trying to gain momentum from Messi's inclusion, from the Apple deal, from all these kind of things. There is positive momentum to be found, and yet they seem to be stuck on fighting these battles where are just complete PR losses.
Yeah, and I mean the referee union in their statements have made it pretty clear, like all of what you just said of all of these things that make it insane to pick these petty battles that make you look bad is why they're asking for more. They're saying, oh, you have this huge TV deal, you can bring in Leo Messi and pals,
right?
And you can't give us, like you said, the equivalent of $100,000 per team,
right?
To give us what we're asking for, which is really not that much, not even full-time money, really. Like,
right. You guys, the league is enjoying its greatest, record attendances. It's supposedly, enjoying a lot of benefits from the Apple deal. It's go down the list. There's all these things that business seems to be going really well for MLS, and they're going to sit here and fight over pennies.
Yeah, it's nuts. They Messi is going to retire sooner than later. And you're not
probably
if you have
replacement refs, it will even be sped up.
Right. And you're not going to have the bandwagon folks who 80% of these people are never going to watch an MLS game again, no matter what happens. Right.
Right. Like they're unwinnable.
Yeah.
Right.
The key is whatever percentage you can turn into fans, convincing them that the league is worth paying attention. And if you're doing stuff like this, that really backs up the belief that a lot of people have about MLS, that it's kind of Bush League, that it has this sort of like falsely inflated value, that it's kind of a house of cards. You're not doing anything to dissuade people of that notion at all. Yeah.
No. Well, I suppose that's maybe a good place to call this. I don't have much else. I think we emptied the chamber there.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I don't have anything to say about Austin FC.
Yeah, we're going to do, I think the hope is that we're going to get Will on to give us a little bit of a preview of Austin FC later this week. Will had some choice words for Austin. Maybe since you're not on Twitter, you may have missed this, but he was like live tweeting his frustration over how bad they were playing. And someone asked him, why do you think that is? And he just said, I'll tell you, it's soft mentality. And then he kind of tried to say that he didn't mean that in the bad way somehow. I don't know how that I'll have to ask him about that. Like, how is that?
Yeah.
What's the positive way to take they have a soft mentality? But anyway, he hopefully we'll get him on, and if not, we'll figure out something else. But so we'll preview Austin FC later in the week. You don't have to worry about that. But anyway, thanks. Good hanging out, Aaron.
Yeah,
I think we're gonna get back to the weekly cadence of the show.
We are. Yeah, it was weirdly like an extremely the shortest ever off season, but also felt really long. So
yeah,
I'm excited to get back to it.
Yeah, exactly. And so with all that said, thank you to our sponsor, Full Pool Wines. Thank you to our subscribers on Sound at Heart. You guys are continuing to blow me away with how we keep getting new subscribers. We're probably going to end up hitting something like 2,500 paid subscribers in the next month or two, which is pretty wild to think about. So I want to say thank you to everyone who is subscribing. And if you aren't a subscriber, I want to encourage you to do that. It's as cheap as $3.50 a month or $27.50 a year. If you want to get into our Discord, it's now $80 a year. But we had to change it. We found out we had to pay sales tax on everything. So we altered the prices to reflect that new reality. But hopefully people are finding that to be a good value. It seems to be. So thank you for supporting us. Thank you for doing this, Aaron. Thank you to Lick It for producing this. I am Jeremiah Shan. This is No Sadietis. Remember, you will never yell alone.
We love you. Let's win another one.